The portrait hung in the CEO's office like a window into another. World, gilt-framed, impossibly elegant, depicting a young woman whose smile seemed to hold secrets. Margaret Chen had commissioned it herself, a celebration of her daughter's graduation from Harvard Business School. She'd hung it where she could see it every morning, a reminder of everything she'd built, everything she'd fought for, everything that made the endless corporate battles worthwhile. She never imagined that one day, her janitor would look at that portrait and whisper 6 words that would shatter her understanding of her own life. "Ma'am, the girl lived with me in the orphanage." Margaret had clawed her way up from nothing. That's what she told herself, what she'd told the Wall Street Journal when they'd profiled her as one of America's youngest female tech CEOs. From nothing to everything, a self-made woman, an inspiration. She'd survived poverty, worked 3 jobs through college, built her company from a cramped apartment into a billion-dollar empire. Her daughter, Emma, was the crown jewel of that empire. Brilliant, poised, destined for greatness. The portrait captured Emma at 23, wearing the pearl necklace Margaret had given her for graduation. It was more than a painting. It was proof that Margaret had won. Carlos Rodriguez had been cleaning the executive floor of Chen Technologies for 3 years. He was invisible in the way that janitors often are, pushing his cart through carpeted hallways at dawn, emptying trash bins, wiping down conference tables still scattered with the debris of million-dollar deals. He'd perfected the art of not being seen, of being present but not present, essential but forgettable. He was 62, with hands weathered by decades of manual labor and eyes that had witnessed more than most people could imagine. He'd come to America 30 years ago with nothing but hope, had worked every job imaginable, sent money back to family in Guatemala until there was no family left to send it to. He'd never married, never had children of his own. His life had been one of service, of small kindnesses performed in empty rooms where no one was watching. He'd seen the portrait 1,000 times, had dusted its frame, careful not to leave streaks on the glass. He'd even admired it. The way working people admire the lives of the wealthy with a mixture of appreciation and resignation, the way you might admire a sunset you know you'll never paint. But on this particular morning, something changed. Margaret arrived early, as she always did, striding through the office in her tailored suit, already on her 2nd coffee, already fielding calls from Tokyo and London. She barely registered Carlos as she passed him in the hallway. He was part of the furniture, part of the machinery that kept her world running smoothly. She was reviewing quarterly reports when she heard the soft knock on her door. Carlos stood in the doorway, his cleaning cart beside him, his face pale. His hands trembled slightly as they gripped his mop handle. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Ms. Chen," he said quietly. His accent was thick, but his English was careful, each word chosen with precision. "But I must speak with you. It's about the portrait." Margaret looked up, irritated. She had a board meeting in an hour. "If you've damaged it—" "No, ma'am." He stepped inside, his eyes fixed on the painting. "Ma'am, the girl lived with me in the orphanage." The words hung in the air like smoke. Margaret's first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss this absurdity and return to her reports. But something in Carlos's face stopped her. He wasn't joking. He wasn't confused. He was terrified. "That's impossible," she said, her voice colder than she intended. "My daughter was never in an orphanage." "You're mistaken." "Casa de Esperanza," Carlos said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Guatemala City, 1987 to 1989. She was 2 years old when she arrived, 3 years old when she left." He paused, his throat working. "She had a birthmark. Here." He touched the left side of his neck. Shaped like a bird. The room tilted. Emma did have a birthmark, exactly where Carlos had indicated. Margaret had kissed it 1,000 times when Emma was small, had joked that it was an angel's fingerprint. She'd never told anyone about it. It wasn't visible unless you knew to look for it, hidden beneath Emma's hairline. "How do you—" Margaret couldn't finish the sentence. Carlos moved closer to the portrait, his eyes shining with something that might have been tears. "I worked at Casa de Esperanza before I came to America. I wasn't a janitor then. I was trying to be a teacher. We had 60 children. So many children. Never enough food, never enough medicine, never enough hands." His voice cracked. "But I remember her. Little Amelia. That's what we called her. She didn't speak when she first came. Wouldn't make a sound. Just these big eyes, watching everything, afraid of everything. Margaret's hands had gone numb. This was impossible. This was insane. Emma wasn't adopted. Emma was hers. She'd given birth to Emma at St. Catherine's Hospital in Manhattan 24 years ago. She had the birth certificate. She had photographs. She had memories of pregnancy, of labor, of holding her newborn daughter for the first time. Except those memories had always been hazy. She'd been young, poor, desperate. There had been complications. They'd told her. What had they told her? I don't understand, Margaret said, and she was horrified to hear her voice shaking. Are you accusing me of something? No, ma'am. I'm not accusing. Carlos turned to face her, and his expression was so gentle it broke something inside her. I'm remembering. When Amelia was adopted, we were so happy. A wealthy American couple. They promised everything. We thought she'd have the life we couldn't give her. He smiled sadly. We prayed for that little girl every night for months. Prayed she'd found a mother who would love her. The truth came slowly. The way dawn comes, not all at once, but in pieces, in fragments of light that gradually illuminate a landscape. You'd been stumbling through blind. Margaret remembered the agency. The private agency. The one that had been shut down years later amid scandal. Something about falsified documents, about desperate parents and forged birth certificates. She'd been 23, poor, drowning in debt, when a woman at the clinic had suggested an alternative, a way to have the family she wanted without the medical bills she couldn't afford. She'd been so young, so naive. They'd given her a baby and papers that said the baby was hers, born at a hospital that had conveniently burned down 2 years later, destroying the records. She'd known on some level. She'd always known. But she'd pushed it down, built her life on top of that knowledge, built her empire on top of that lie. And in the building, in the achieving, in the loving of the daughter who was hers in every way that mattered, she'd convinced herself the lie was truth. Does she know? Carlos asked softly. No. Margaret's voice was barely audible. Should she? Carlos was quiet for a long moment, studying the portrait. At the orphanage, we had so little. But we had love. We had each other. I used to sing to the children at night. Silly songs. Old songs my grandmother taught me. He hummed a few. Bars of something gentle and sad. Amelia, Emma, she loved one song especially. About a bird who flies far from home but never forgets where she came from. Margaret felt tears burning in her eyes. I've given her everything. Yes, Carlos agreed. You have. A mother's love, a home and education, a future. Everything we prayed for. He turned to her, and his smile was genuine. You became the answer to our prayers, Ms. Chen, whether you knew it or not. But I lied to her. My whole life is built on love, Carlos interrupted gently. Everything else, the papers, the documents, those are just paper. But you raised her. You loved her. You are her mother. He paused. But maybe she deserves to know where she came from. Maybe she deserves to know that before you, she was already loved. That's 60 children and 5. Adults in a cramped orphanage in Guatemala City loved her and wanted her to have everything we couldn't give her. The board meeting happened without Margaret. She sat in her office for hours, staring at the portrait. Seeing Emma for the first time. Not as an extension of herself, not as proof of her success, but as a whole person with a history that existed before Margaret. A story that began in a place she'd tried to forget existed. When Emma arrived that evening, she worked in the building now. 2 floors down, Margaret told her everything. It was the hardest conversation of her life. There were tears. There was shock. There was anger. But there was also something else. Relief, maybe, or recognition. Emma had always felt different. Had always sensed something beneath the surface of her perfect life. Now she had words for it. Now she had context. Can I meet him? Emma asked finally, her voice hoarse from crying. The janitor, Carlos, can I meet him? They found him on the 4th floor, cleaning an empty conference room. When he saw Emma, his face transformed. For a moment, he was 30 years younger, standing in a crowded orphanage, singing lullabies to frightened children. Little Amelia, he breathed. Emma crossed the room in 3 steps and hugged him. This stranger who wasn't a stranger, This man who represented everything she'd lost and never knew she'd had. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for taking care of me. Thank you for remembering." Carlos hugged her back. This girl who'd once been small enough to fit in his arms, who he'd rocked to sleep on nights, when the orphanage was too hot and the children too many. "We never forgot you," he said. "Any of you. Every child who left, we carried them in our hearts." Margaret watched them, mother and daughter, and the man who'd bridged the gap between them. She'd spent her life building walls, walls of success, of security, of carefully constructed narrative. But standing in that conference room, watching Emma embrace the truth of her origins, Margaret understood that some walls were meant to be broken down. The next day, Margaret established a foundation. Millions of dollars directed toward orphanages in Central America, toward improving conditions, toward ensuring that children like Emma, like Amelia, were cared for with dignity and love. She flew to Guatemala City with Emma and Carlos, visited Casa de Esperanza, met the people who still worked there, and in her office the portrait remained. But now, when Margaret looked at it, she saw more than just her daughter. She saw all the hands that had shaped Emma's life. The workers at an orphanage who'd loved her first, the man who'd remembered her after decades. The complicated, messy, beautiful truth that families aren't built on lies or papers or even blood. They're built on love, on showing up, on caring when you don't have to, on remembering, even when it would be easier to forget. Carlos continued cleaning the executive floor. But now Emma stopped by to chat with him most mornings. Now Margaret invited him to family dinners. Now the invisible man was seen, not as a janitor, but as what he'd always been, a man who dedicated his life to caring for others, whose small kindnesses had echoed across decades and continents. Sometimes the greatest acts of humanity aren't grand gestures. Sometimes they're simple things. A man remembering a child, a mother listening, a daughter brave enough to embrace a truth that reshapes everything. Sometimes kindness is just seeing someone, really seeing them, and choosing to honor the role they played in making us who we are. The portrait still hangs in Margaret's office, but now it means something different. Now it's not proof of her success. It's a reminder that every life is a tapestry, woven from threads we don't always choose, held together by people we don't always thank, and that the most powerful thing we can do is acknowledge those threads, honor those people, and recognize that we're all connected in ways we can't imagine. By love, by memory, by the quiet heroism of ordinary people who care for children they'll never see again, who remember names no one else remembers, who carry stories that need to be told,